Could civilization ever rebuild on Great Bear Island?
That's what we're going to be discussing today. So, Kurt, what's your opinion or feeling? Do you think civilization could ever rebuild on Great Bear Island?
I'm always the person who thinks that anything is possible. There's a difference between impossibility and improbability, and nothing is impossible, but things are improbable.
Yes.
Great Bear Island suffered, great tragedy through the IP and the lore and the history of Great Bear. So they went through different stages of decline and what have you. Depending on some of the things that have happened over the years, it would be a viability thing, I think. If civilization was able to come back to Great Bear Island, it would be in small chunks. It would require, a lot of work, it would be a cash thing. There would have to be a reason to do it. Either be fishing, farming, or something. Something would have to take hold to bring some viability back to it. But it would be quite a monumental task, I think.
Yeah, well, I think my main concern with it is you have to think the entire world was affected by this, not only by the collapse, but also by the first flare. So it's like the entire world needs to get its stuff together first before you could even think about trying to, rebuild on Great Bear Island or to even make that possible.
Yeah, and I guess my answer is more of a what if it was more localized, but because this is kind of more of a planet-wide catastrophe, yeah, its isolation would make it. At this point, the world is trying to be, what's the most viable thing that we can do? I would think that mass migration would be quite the thing. People would be looking for warmer weather, better, living conditions, and what have you. So, it would be a very isolated place to live. I think it would be very difficult. But I mean, we watch people that live in the Yukon and in Alaska under really harsh conditions. I'm sure there are people that live in like Siberia and stuff that we don't see regularly on TV like we do, that live through these types of winters and what have you. So it's possible, but as far as I guess civilization would have to rebuild on a grander scale in order for Great Bear to take on sort of a civilizational feel. But it would probably be, it'd be like turning back the clock. It would be more like when, you can go back maybe as far as the Vikings, but, when the settlers came to North America or to other places, they were small, little, settlements that, were 20 to 50 people. And that it might be something along that lines again.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I'm not really sure about like the massive industry though, like we currently see on Great Bear Island, like the remains of it as well, just because of the sheer amount of seismic activity. I think that would be a really hard sell because it almost feels like anything that you would build would collapse. And I know there's technology now that to help build buildings that, can withstand certain magnitudes of earthquakes and things like that, or they're less vulnerable. But I don't think that's something that's really available to typical people. And like you're talking about on like a smaller scale like that, I'm not sure if it would ever extend, beyond like a small settlement or something like that.
And it wouldn't be, and depending on where Great Bear Island is in the greater world, how much of that is prevalent. I mean, if it were like, Catalina Island off the coast of California, it would make sense that you would have this earthquake technology because LA and all that has to build to those standards. But this being further north, granted, Alaska has their own problem with earthquakes and what have you. Would that technology be readily available, or is it something that can be imported in small scale?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question as well.
I think a lot of it would have to do with the viability of the area. Is somebody able to stay for short periods of time for fishing or, again, like there's orchards all over in the area. Is farming viable? I think that would, it would be maybe it would be a migrational thing too, where you only go in part of the year and you harvest what's available, like in the fishing industry or whatever.
Yeah, I think that would make more sense to me, or maybe even something along the lines of like a nature preserve or something like that, or maybe even like a hunting preserve.
And that's
So,
possible. And again, that kind of goes back to the world getting back on its feet. If we leave it in the sense that we're still recovering, the resources there may be such that they're too valuable to let slip out of somebody's fingers. And the one big thing would be the coal. Uranium
yeah.
wouldn't be as viable because that requires a lot of technology to, you know, create the uranium has to be enriched in order to be worthy of being in a, like a, you know, a nuclear power plant or anything. But coal can heat a lot of things. They can run steam on that, which
Yeah.
I think that steam power would probably make a big comeback in this situation if electronics were, you know, dead and you can't get things running. You know, eventually I think diesel would come back because you don't need a lot of electronics to get diesel going. So a lot of old tractors would probably still run, and you know, coal would be a big thing. So you'd probably see kind of a resurgence of steam power and that. So it would depend on, I think it would depend on the need. You know, if you needed the coal, it might be so much money worth the risk. Because there's so much.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say that's a really good point about the coal, and it's like the state of the world now as well. It almost might be worth it to venture to Great Bear for those resources, especially if you're having the world almost going back to like an industrial age, or, you know, early industrial age, or, you know, there's like factories running off of coal and all that.
I can almost see that because of the fact that it's an electronic type apocalypse, where, you know, a lot of us in what we do in the day-to-day world, if the internet goes down, just the internet, how much does that affect people's lives? So
quite a lot.
So, you know, and now you take the power out, you've basically turned back the clock to the 1800s. So I think steam and that would be kind of a fallback. You would have this resurgence of rebuilding steam and doing a lot of that stuff, you know. So yeah, coal might be this huge commodity that is worth people's lives, like it was if you go back circa 1800s. You know, whaling was dangerous, and that was a source of oil for lamps and stuff, and the coal mines were dangerous back then. I mean, any type of footage you ever see of that stuff. So,
well, my question is so you seem to know a bit about diesel. So how do they actually make diesel fuel? Is it like normal gasoline and it needs to be refined? Because if it does need to be refined as well, I'm almost wondering if that's even effective to make.
It is a part of the refining process. So when you take the crude oil, obviously it's refined in pressure vessels and what have you, and the different fuels come out at different temperatures. So like, you know, a barrel of crude oil will produce X amount of gallons of gasoline, diesel, kerosene, jet fuel. You get a lot of different stuff out of it depending on pressures and stuff. So it actually will refine down into a lot of different products and stuff. But diesel is easier to produce than gasoline because I don't think it needs the temperatures and what have you. Plus, the actual, like cooking oils and things like that, can be used as diesel. So if, again, going back to like whaling or anything that you can produce an oil, I mean, even it would be very inefficient. But I mean, even animal fat that can be rendered down to an oil, you can change an oil into a burnable fuel in diesel. So there's a lot of videos out there where people will do this with like fast food grease. So like, you know, when you, like McDonald's dumps their used oil they usually send it someplace out to be filtered and recycled and stuff. But you could actually take that and do some chemical changes to it. I'd have to look up what those chemical changes are, but you can actually change its composition and pour it into the tank of a diesel, and it would run. Especially older diesels. The newer stuff is a lot different in today's standards. But if you go back, like I was talking about, like old tractors, you get like an old Ford or John Deere or Massey Ferguson tractor that ran on old diesel. They were simple back then. They were basically just diesel-powered steam engines at that point. Once the fuel ignites, it'll run forever because it doesn't require spark. So, because the compression ratios are so high. So, it's an interesting aspect that I think that limited diesel would be important. And there's probably enough refined diesel in the world that it would go for a little while if they stretched it, and then the use of steam. So, in fact, something to consider is that one of the photographs or concept art things for the last part of the story is a steamship.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting to note. Yeah.
So coal, and wood and all that, and Great Bear Island has a ton of lumber on it. So if you're not going to live on it, there could be, a lot of use for that. And going back again to another like little snippet of the future is in the Black Frost teaser trailer. There's a scene where the guy's chopping down the tree, and in the background is a steam-powered logging device that pulls logs through the forest. So here we are again. People going back. It's like turning back the clock. It's going to be an item where people are going to be living the late 17, early 1800s over again. Sailing ships are going to take over. Steam. It's going to be a huge learning curve for a lot of people, but that's where I could see Great Bear Island coming back to a civilizational type thing. No. Probably not. Not looking at it like when my first comments were based on this. If this was an isolated thing, it would take money to do. But if this is a worldwide catastrophe, Great Bear Island just becomes a cache of resources, and you would go in. Factory. You would go in when you knew it was safe to do so, as safe as possible. Maybe you go in during the spring or the summer, and you harvest what you can. And you're going to utilize it as just a huge cache of resources.
Yeah. And another thing to note about the trees too is like making charcoal out of them as well. So, because charcoal will burn much hotter than just plain wood or whatever. So I could see that also being utilized for that as well.
So I think my final thought would be is that would civilization be able to come back to Great Bear? Not civilization as we know it. It would probably be a group of little villages, something along the lines like they talk about, Perseverance Mills or Port Mary. There would be like a little port city, maybe even like Coastal Highway, where the ship would come in, you'd disembark, and they might rebuild the little houses right there on the coast, and there would be a means that they would have to figure out. And it may be something, and this falls into something that you really enjoy, and then you might see a resurgence of horse and buggy. They might try to repair the roads enough to that they're more like a gravel stone road, and that's how they're going to haul this stuff out. Or maybe they get the rail lines fixed enough to even have the horses pull rail cars.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine trying to repair that railroad.
No, but I mean, there's areas. I mean, but if you brought in dynamite, you could clear some of these areas, and you could, I mean, if you think about it, you go back. There wasn't machinery that did mining back in the 1800s. It was all done, by hand.
By hand.
So there'd be a lot of people with pickaxes, and you'd have a lot of people needing to be fed. So hey, you want to be fed, you need to come over to Great Bear Island and you need to, put in your 10-hour day and help clear the railroad or clear the road so that we can get materials out. So it's be a very interesting topic.
Yeah, I think there's another aspect of this too that we hadn't really touched on, and that's the hostility of the wildlife as well. Um, so I used to kind of think that the wildlife was hostile because of the first flare, but it's like you talk to people in Wintermute, and they're not surprised that the wolves are aggressive at all. So that kind of tells you that, the predators have been aggressive since before the first flare, and it's something the locals kind of known. So it's almost like a learned behavior in the wildlife. So even if things get fixed with the auroras and everything like that, the wildlife is probably still going to be more hostile, and that's going to be like hard trying to push deeper and deeper into the wilderness where you have these, aggressive predators kind of roaming around as well. I
Well,
know we'll still have guns and things like that as well, but
yeah, and yeah, it would definitely be a stepping stone. You'd have to set it. It would, you'd have to basically create a beachhead or a foothold,
mhm,
and
yeah,
you would retake the island, and it might require a lot of hunting, and you're going to have trappers go in and clear, the wolves out to make it safe for the miners to come in, and or the road crews to come in or whatever. So yeah, it would be, but the payoff has to be huge for that, which I think would be the lumber and the coal, depending on
yeah,
its proximity to whatever, larger uh, cache of people are, and it would have to be a pretty good sizable amount of people to take that risk.
true, true. Completely agree with that. Because it's not really viable otherwise. I mean, it has to be worth the cost and the effort and the time to put it in. So I don't think they would do it for just a place to live with a bunch of angry wolves.
No, it would
Yeah.
be the risk reward factor, and
Yeah.
so if there was enough people that the rewards were worth it, then there would be some viable compensation for the risk, whether it would be money or food security or whatever the currency is of that world. There would have to be the risk reward factor, and I guess that again it would depend on what civilization is surviving that close to proximity to Great Bear Island to make it worth the risk.
Yeah. Agreed. So to kind of wrap it up, the final verdict essentially is that no, civilization wouldn't return, not to how it was at least, and it would definitely have to be worth the reward to go there and do it.
Agreed.
All right. Well, thank you all so very much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this mini podcast, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.